What are some of the biggest mistakes that I made when I was trying to put a stop to binge eating? That's what we're talking about today. And I want to jump right in because we have a lot to cover. And if you know my story, you might know that I didn't always have a healthy relationship with food. In fact, for years of my life, I was on that on and off wagon, and I would go through periods of restricting and then binging. And the more that I dieted, the more the binges occurred. And often it was like this sweet spot I would call after like 7:30, 8 p.m. every night. It was like all bets were off and I would lose total control and basically just go ham on everything in my kitchen pantry. And it was almost like the second that I started eating, I was always looking towards the next thing that I was going to eat. So let's say I was eating chips, then I was thinking, okay, what's the next thing that I'm going to have? Whether that was going to be something sweet or something salty. First of all, I was never in the present of paying attention to what I was eating, enjoying it, listening to my body. And I was also just overwhelmed with guilt and with shame about my behaviors that it repeated itself time and time again. And so the reason why I want to talk about this is because these are the same mistakes, like the mistakes that I made are the same mistakes that I see the women in my community make every single day. And it breaks my heart because number one, I have been there. And I know how hard it is to be stuck in this vicious cycle and wanting so hard to feel in control around food. And it almost feels like the more you try to control food, the more out of control you feel. And it also breaks my heart because we live in a culture, in diet culture, that promotes these disordered eating habits, these disordered eating advice on how to stop binge eating that actually create these behaviors and make them worse. And so if you are someone who struggles with binge eating, if you feel like you can't trust yourself around certain foods, and if you are tired of constantly being on and off the wagon, starting again on Monday or on January 1st, then this episode is going to be really valuable for you. And I'm speaking from personal experience, and I'm also going to bring in scientific data and research because this is all backed by science. And so that's something that's really important to understand about intuitive eating, which was the key for me to healing from these disordered eating patterns. It's that intuitive eating is science-based. It is evidence-backed by so much research. Over 200 studies have been done. And one of the major health impacts, health benefits that come from becoming an intuitive eater is reducing and even eliminating binge eating. And before I get into talking about the biggest mistakes that I made years ago, I think it's really important to also note that, and this is something that I wish that I had known back when I was struggling with my eating disorder, is that binge eating is not your fault. You are not born with this character defect, with this flaw, with something broken within you that causes binge eating. Binge eating has a bunch of different causes, from psychological causes, emotional causes, and biological causes, all of which we can talk about in a separate episode. And we actually covered that in my episode with Michelle Shapiro. I believe that was episode 23. But don't quote me on that. But it was titled How to Stop Binge Eating with Michelle Shapiro. And that was such a good episode. So if you are struggling with binge eating, that's a great episode to go back to. But if you find yourself beating yourself up for lacking willpower or discipline or motivation, and you think that that's the reason why you're still struggling with binge eating, I hope that you can hear this message loud and clear as someone who has been in your shoes, that binge eating has a cause. It has a root reason why it happens. And to just throw a set of rules or restrictions or a new diet on top of this bleeding wound, it doesn't fix that root cause. It's the analogy of, like, let's say you're in a boat and there's a hole in your boat and water starts coming into your boat and you try to just scoop that water out using like a bucket and trying to get that water out, as long as the hole is still there, water is going to keep coming into the boat and it's going to sink you eventually. And what we need to do is we need to patch that hole. We need to understand the root cause of it all. And that's what we're going to do in the intuitive eating challenge that will be starting on April 20th. So if you want to learn more about what the root cause of binge eating is, if you want to develop the tools to overcome binge eating, we're going to cover that in the challenge. So let's get into some of the top mistakes I was making when I was trying to overcome binge eating. So number one, and this is such a common one, is I was avoiding carbs like it was the plague. I had a extreme fear of carbs, and I was convinced that carbs would make me gain weight. It would make me unhealthy. And that was due to, the just overarching messaging that happens in our society, in diet culture. It doesn't take a very long Google search or a search on Instagram to hear all of this fear mongering around carbs. And so I went along with it. And I was so obsessed with shrinking my body that I thought, okay, well, I can just live off of protein and fat and very little carbs. And so I would replace my bread with sweet potato or a very low carb option of bread. I would not eat pasta. I ate zucchini noodles instead, or konjac noodles, which are like these, no offense if anyone likes them, but like these very slimy, like gelatiny type of noodles. And I would try to convince myself that that was pasta. And I would try to convince myself that I like them. And what that did is it made me feel hungry all the time, because carbs are the gold standard of food energy for your body. It is one of the 3 macronutrients, and it is vital for your functioning. It is vital for creating a balanced meal. And now that I've made peace with food and I have this good relationship with food and I love carbs and I include carbs and lots of them at every meal, I walk away feeling so much better, so much more satisfied. And so that was something that I was missing back then. I would walk away from my meals feeling like I ate, but I'm still looking for something. I'm still craving that sugar. I'm still craving something more. And that's because my body was looking for this source of energy that I wasn't giving it. I wasn't giving enough of it. And so I would spend my entire day trying so hard to limit carbs and to cut them out until nighttime came, and I had accumulated so much deprivation. I had accumulated this absence of a key need for my body that when nighttime came around, it was like my body was sending me so many signals that I was ignoring all day long through my hunger, my headaches, my weaknesses, my fatigue, my constant craving for carbs that I just ignored and pushed aside and also blamed myself for, right? If I had cravings for carbs, I thought that there was something wrong with me. I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that maybe my body was trying to send me a signal, was trying to speak to me, and I just ignored it. So at the end of the day, it was like my body couldn't handle that anymore, right? It had to get its needs met. And so, of course, the things that I started craving were high carb, high sugar foods, because that's what my body needed. Carbs are the quickest source of energy for your body. It's the source of fuel that your body is able to convert into energy the fastest. And so, of course, when I was lacking that fuel, that energy all day long, it manifested in cravings, right? Let's say you go a couple of days without sleeping properly. You're going to start craving sleep. And if you go a couple of days, like really heavily being sleep deprived on 2 or 3 hours a night, then eventually when you do end up sleeping, you're not just going to sleep another 2 or 3 hours, you're going to oversleep. Your body is lacking that essential need. And so you are going to have to overdo it. Same thing for water. Let's say you go a couple of hours, or for me, it would be like 30 minutes because I'm always drinking water. But let's say you go a couple of hours or even like a full day without drinking. When eventually you have access to a water source, you're not just going to have a small sip of water, you're going to chug that water bottle in a way that feels uncontrollable. So the same thing happens when your body doesn't get a need met in the form of carbs. Like I said, carbs are the gold standard of food energy. So your cells, your body functions best when you receive a certain level of carbs in the form of glucose. And even a small decrease can cause problems. Your brain, your nervous system, and the red blood cells in your body rely exclusively on glucose for fuel. That means your brain only uses carbs for energy. So not only is avoiding carbs problematic for the increase of binge eating, but it's also problematic for the proper functioning of your body. When you don't get enough carbs in your diet, and when I say diet, I just mean the overall food intake that you have in a day, your body has to get creative. It has to turn towards other energy sources that you have in your body. And what it does is it turns to the protein in your muscles. It starts eating away at your muscles because it needs from somewhere, it needs energy. And your muscles are like the building block of your body. So I want you to picture a house. When you're building a house, it has the foundation, right? So it has those like pillars, those wooden pillars, those blocks that keep your walls up. And then on top of that, you'll add in the drywall and you'll add in things on the inside. When you start chipping away at the protein in your body because you're not giving your body enough carbs, it's like you're chipping away at the foundation of your house. And so eventually, when you're chipping away enough at it, your entire house is going to start crumbling down. Your entire house is going to fall apart. And so the same thing happens in your body. And so that's why some of the negative side effects that occur when you don't get enough carbs in your body is dizziness, fatigue, weakness, headaches, muscle cramps, constipation, loss of hair. I could do a whole other episode on what low carb does to your body. And I know that a big reason that people tend to do low carb is because it's a very quick fix. It helps you lose weight quickly. And that reason is twofold. Number one, because most of that weight that you lose is water weight. For each gram of carbs, you hold on to 3 grams of water. And so of course, when you start cutting back on carbs, you get rid of some of that water weight, but that's not actual pounds. It's not actual fat loss. It's just water weight loss. And another reason that people tend to lose weight quickly on low carb, it's because you start chipping away at your muscle. You start chipping away at the protein in your body. And so you're getting rid of the most efficient energy burner in your body. Muscles is the most expensive part of your body that needs that energy to maintain. And so when you are going low carb, you're chipping away at that piece of your body that, yes, it will reflect with losing weight on the scale, but it's also going to reflect in losing something that is vital to your health. So going low carb was one of the mistakes that I made while trying to stop binge eating. The second one was counting calories, tracking every single calorie that I was eating. When I think of university especially, I can just remember MyFitnessPal being the number one app on my phone. I could still tell you every single calorie that's found in pretty much any food. just because I've tracked it so many times that it lives rent free in my brain now. And luckily, now that I have healed my relationship with food, I'm able to eat and not look at my plate in terms of like, this is 210 calories and this is 100 calories. But I know that back in the day before I went through my intuitive eating journey, that's how it was. My life, my food choices weren't dictated by what my body was telling me. It was dictated by an arbitrary set of rules around how many calories I could or couldn't eat. And so what would happen is I, for some reason, was trying to respect a ridiculously low number of calories. And I said for some reason, but I actually know exactly for what reason. It's because I had like put in my weight and my energy levels into MyFitnessPal or into Noom, like into those different calorie calculators. And the number that they gave me, I looked at and said, all right, this is how much I should be eating. And I know that it would range between 1,200 and 1,600 calories, depending on where I was at in my life, because I struggled with disordered eating and binge eating for, over 6 years. And I think it's important to note as well is that 1,200 calories is the calorie requirement of a toddler. It is how much a toddler, a 2 or 3-year-old, needs to eat, not a grown adult. And so I was convinced that if I stuck to that calorie intake, then I would lose weight. And that's what being healthy was all about. And it had nothing to do with the signals that my body was sending me, because I was just hungry all day long. I would finish a meal and still be hungry, and I had this set of rules that I couldn't eat for another 2 or 3 hours. And so I would finish my meal and think, okay, let's try to make it until the next meal or the next snack. And then I would use coffee as a way of suppressing my appetite, or I would try to drink bubbly water as a way of suppressing my appetite, or go for a walk or chew gum. And so I was severely underfueling my body. And in the same way that not eating enough carbs resulted in binge eating, well, just not eating enough, period, resulted in binge eating. This is something that a lot of my clients and women in my community say to me is like, I'm able to be good all day, right? Like I eat super clean, I stick to my plan all day, but then for some reason I lose all control at night and I just can't stop eating and I'm just so hungry. And to that, I just want you to think about, and I've used this analogy before, if you hold your breath underwater for 2-3 minutes, right? And you consider that as being good, and then you come up for air, your body did not get enough air for the past 2 or 3 minutes. And so, of course, when you come up for air, you're going to be gasping in a chaotic manner, trying to get as much air into your body. And so when you are trying to be quote unquote good all day, whether that means restricting your calories or that means just eating quote unquote clean and depriving yourself of foods that you really want, then on a psychological level, deprivation builds up, right? You start creating all of this tension every time that you say no to food. Then you create more tension inside your body. You want that food more. You put it on a pedestal. You think about it more. And on the biological side, you're not giving your body enough energy. You're not giving your body the need that it needs. You're not the same thing that like you need sleep, you need air, you need rest, you need enough food. And a calorie calculator does not know what that looks like for you. Even if you put in your weight or your energy levels, it doesn't take into account your biology, your history, your preferences, your needs that cannot be reflected in an online calculator. And another reason why this triggered even more binge eating is, let's say that my calorie requirement was 1400 calories, and comes 8 p.m., I've eaten 1400 calories, but I'm still hungry. I'm still starving. And in my head, it goes a little bit like this. All right, just go to bed, right? Like, just go to bed. You've eaten your 1400 calories. You can't have any more food. And so I try to push away that need for food, but my body disagrees. My body needs more of that food. And so instead, it's like this internal fight between my biology and my brain, these food rules, this diet mindset. And then eventually your biology wins. It always wins. And so I cave. I say, okay, screw it. I'm going to have something, right? And usually it's going to be something that's high carb, high sugar. So I start eating, and then that all or nothing mentality goes on in my head. And I think, well, I've already gone over my calorie requirements. I've already broken my rule. I've already ruined my day of eating. So might as well just eat all of the things, right? If I'm going to eat 100 calories, well, I'm going to eat 700 calories because it doesn't matter. And I'm just going to start again tomorrow. And tomorrow I'm going to respect my 1400 calories. So that's another mistake that I made when I was trying to stop binge eating, is counting calories, which actually made my binge eating worse. The third mistake is, and I kind of hit on this already, it's eating according to food rules, not according to my body. And so instead of listening to my hunger cues and my fullness cues and what my body was craving and satisfaction, I listened to rules that I had set for myself. So I can only eat every 2 or 3 hours. I can't eat after 8 p.m. I can't eat before 9 a.m. I can only eat 100 grams of carbs. I can only eat 1400 calories. And all of these sets of rules overpowered my food choices instead of what my body was trying to communicate with me. And so I want you to picture this, like, imagine that you have this friend and you have this good relationship with your friend. And so in this situation, your body is that friend. So you have a good relationship with your body, good relationship with that friend, and you communicate regularly. So you speak on the phone every day, you communicate about what's going on with you, and you have just like that open sense of communication. And then eventually you decide that you don't want to talk to your friend anymore. You don't want to listen to your friend anymore. And so she tries calling you and you don't answer. And in this analogy, your body is your friend. So your body is trying to call you, your body is trying to communicate with you. I need food, I need carbs, I need fuel. But you're like, you know what? I think that diet culture knows better. I think that this app, I think that this plan, I think that this influencer, I think that this expert knows better than my own body. So I'm just not going to listen. And so your body is trying to call you, is trying to communicate with you. And the same way that, like, if you were trying to call a friend and they just weren't answering the phone, you would stop calling eventually. And so your body eventually decides, well, she's not going to listen, right? No matter how many signals I try to send to her, thoughts about food, hunger, headaches, stomach growling, she doesn't listen to me. So I'm just going to stop calling. I'm just going to stop communicating with her. And so then eating becomes so confusing for your body because, number one, it's going to result, like, constantly denying your hunger is going to result in periods of overeating because of that same analogy of like holding your breath and then gasping for air. But number two is that the more you ignore your body, the more your hunger cues are going to fade, right? Because your body thinks, well, she's not going to listen to the hunger cues anymore, so why would I send them? And then you don't hear your hunger cues until they're super extreme. They are so loud. They are ravenous. A tool that I use in the Food Freedom Academy is the hunger scale. And this is something that I'm actually going to teach as well in the intuitive eating challenge. So if you're part of that, be excited because that's one of my favorite tools that I use to get you back in touch with your body. But the hunger scale is this scale that goes from 1 to 10. 1 being like ravenously hungry that you would literally eat an inanimate object. And then 10 being like so incredibly full that it is so painful, like you can't even get up. And so your hunger cues are only going to manifest in your body when you're at that 1 extreme ravenous state. You're no longer going to feel the nuances of like a comfortable hunger. You're no longer going to be able to feed your body before it gets to that extreme state. And so, of course, when you get to that 1 or 2 on the hunger scale, it's like when you pull an elastic band, like you pull it until you can't pull it any longer. And then eventually you let go, it's going to go flying on the other side of the room. And so when you get to that extreme ravenous state on a 1 or 2 on the hunger scale, then when you eat, you're not going to be able to stop when you're at a comfortable level. You're going to eat to a point of physical discomfort on the other side of the hunger scale at the 9 or 10. Not because you're lacking willpower, not because there's something wrong with you. Your body is extremely smart. And what it just sensed was scarcity. I'm not getting enough food. I don't have enough access to food. And I'm almost starving. And so I have to stock up on as much food as possible, even if I feel uncomfortable, because I don't know when's the next time that I'm going to have access to food again. So that's exactly what happened to me. I was eating according to rules, not according to my body. So I wouldn't feel those nuanced hunger signals. I wasn't connected to my body. In fact, I felt like I was walking around in a body I couldn't trust. And so, of course, this just made the binge eating worse. And the more I binged, the more I would blame myself. I would blame my lack of willpower and discipline instead of realizing that my body was desperately trying to communicate with me, was desperately trying to get me to listen and to honor my needs. But instead, I was so caught up in my diet mentality, in all of my food rules, in like this loud chatter inside my head about what I shouldn't and shouldn't eat, that I couldn't possibly pay attention to my body. All right, so mistake number 4 that I made was trying to keep junk food out of the house. So one of the things that I started to pick up on is that there were certain foods that I couldn't trust myself around, whether that was candy, chocolate, chips. For me, it was pretty much any food that I tried to cut out, any food that I put in the bad category, any food that diet culture makes you think you shouldn't eat and makes you feel guilty for eating, I couldn't trust myself around. I couldn't control myself around. Isn't that ironic? Isn't that coincidental that the food that you tend to not be able to control yourself around is also the food that you tend to avoid? And so I did what most people stuck in diet culture is to do, and I would just not buy these foods. And I thought, just if it's not in front of me, if I don't see it, out of sight, out of mind. It didn't work out that way. And if you've ever tried to do that, you have probably experienced that it doesn't work out that way. Because what happens is that when you tell yourself you can't have these foods, and you even tell yourself you're so distrustful of yourself around these foods that you can't even keep them in the house, well, then you start putting them up on a pedestal, right? You want what you can't have, right? So that creates more of that tension, more of those cravings for those things that you can't have. Have you ever gone on a diet that tells you, for example, you can't have apples, and then you just start wanting to have apples? If you go on a diet that tells you you can't have carbs, you just start thinking about carbs more. And so when you tell yourself you can't keep food out of the house, number 1 is on a psychological level, on an identity level. This is you telling your brain, I cannot trust myself around these foods. And your brain is like a loose child. It takes in whatever information you give it, and it integrates that as part of your identity. And so if you keep telling yourself, I can't trust myself around these foods, I can't keep these foods in the house without losing control, then you're going to keep reinforcing that into your psyche, into who you are as a person. And if you believe that to your core, then you are going to keep repeating that same pattern over and over again, those same habits, because you believe that that's something you'll never be able to solve. And then on the behavioral side, well, if you tell yourself you can't have a food, then what happens when you are eventually confronted with that food? So let's say you don't buy brownies, you don't buy chips, you don't buy ice cream in your home. You're not going to be able to avoid those foods forever. So what would happen for me is I would go to a party, for example, and there'd be chips there. Or I'd go to a birthday party and there'd be cake there. And because I hadn't gone through systematic habituation, which is a process I teach in the academy of getting you used to having those forbidden, quote unquote, forbidden foods in your life, I was not exposed to those foods regularly. And so when I would finally be in contact with those foods, my brain would like go crazy and think, oh my God, I never have these foods. This is a special occasion. So might as well eat as much as I can now because I never have these foods. This is a special food. And so it's almost impossible to eat those foods in quote unquote moderation in a balanced way, in a peaceful and enjoyable way, when you think that you're never going to be able to have them again because you keep them out of the house. And so, of course, when I would go to birthday parties, or I would go to all-you-can-eat buffets, or I would go to a party where there was these foods, it wasn't about the party. I wasn't able to be present with my friends or with my family. My mind was hyper-focused on the food that I can't have. And it's really hard to live your life and to be present and to make valuable memories when the entire time you're thinking about food. When I think back on the big moments in my life that were happening around the same time as I was struggling with my eating disorder, with my long line of yo-yo dieting, I remember those memories by what I ate, not by the conversations I had with people, the moments, the memories I made. No, I honestly remember those moments by what I ate. I remember my sister's baby shower by my inability to step away from the buffet table. I remember my inability to stop eating. I remember me rushing to the bathroom back and forth, me filling up my plate, even though I was so not hungry. I was stuffed. I had a stomach ache, but I couldn't stop eating. And that is because I was so deprived in my day-to-day life. I was not eating enough. I was not eating enough of the foods I wanted. I was constantly trying to eat the quote-unquote healthy food and not any foods that I really craved. And so, of course, when there's this big occasion and you're presented with all of these foods that are terrifying to you, then you end up eating all of them and you end up not being able to stop. So that was the fourth mistake that I make, was trying to keep junk food out of the house. And the fifth mistake, and this is 5 of like 20. I mean, if I did an episode on all of the different things that I was doing wrong at the time to my binge eating and my relationship with food, I could talk here for hours. And if you like this episode, I could definitely do a part 2 on some more of the mistakes that I saw within myself and also in the women in my community and some of my clients. But the fifth mistake I'm going to talk about today is not reflecting after a binge. There is a big difference between beating yourself up and feeling guilt and shaming yourself and then reflecting on what happened. I know that a lot of people that are working on healing the relationship with food, a lot of them do struggle with binge eating. One of the things that they'll do is after a binge, instead of shaming themselves, guilting themselves, they'll say, you know what? Tomorrow's a new day. I'm just going to move on. I'm going to forget about it. And I think that's obviously better than feeling all of the shame and the guilt. Like that's something that we want to stay way away from. But it's also not helpful because it doesn't give you the opportunity to learn from what just happened, right? Let's say you write an exam and you get a bunch of questions wrong and you get your exam back and you want to do better next time around. You want to know what questions you got wrong and you want to know what the right answers were. And instead of just saying, okay, well, I'm just going to move on and next exam, I'm just going to do better, right? You want to learn where your mistakes were. And so this is something I have a post-binge reflection worksheet for my clients in the academy where I help them reflect what happened before the binge, during a binge, and after a binge. Because binges don't happen in a vacuum. You can always trace back the dots. You can always connect the dots and understand what led to this, right? So whether that was not eating enough, whether that was a cause of emotional eating, that was a psychological trigger. Like I was saying at the beginning of this episode, there's so many reasons why we binge. And this is one of my favorite things I like to do with my clients on our client calls. And they come to me and let's say we talk about a binge, is to help them understand where this happened, where this came from. Because what most people do after a binge is either number one, they feel guilt, shame, and then they blame their lack of willpower. And when you blame your lack of willpower, you take away your ability to actually address the root cause of it. Because again, you're not born with a lack of willpower. You're not born binge eating. It was a learned behavior. And when we are able to look at that as a learned behavior, we can also look at how we can unlearn this behavior. So when I learned how to reflect and learn from my binge eating, and I looked at it as an opportunity to get curious and non-judgmental. And I always explain to my clients, think of this as like you put on a scientist hat and you're gathering data. When you look at it from a non-judgmental, kind perspective, then you remove the guilt and the shame and you start learning about why you do the things that you do. Why do these behaviors keep happening? Because if you keep boiling it down to a lack of willpower, number one, that's not even accurate because willpower and binge eating don't have anything to do with one another. But number two is you're giving your brain that information that there's just something wrong with you and that you'll never be able to fix this. And then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you truly believe that you'll never be able to fix this, then every time that you're confronted with your fear foods or your off-limit foods, your brain is going to remember that. And it's going to just trigger more of the behaviors, more of the situations that you're used to seeing. That feels familiar for your brain, feels familiar for you. So those are the 5 mistakes. So let me go do a recap. So number 1 is avoiding carbs. Number 2 was counting calories. Number 3 was eating according to food rules, not according to my body. Number 4 was trying to keep junk food out of the house. And number 5 was not reflecting after a binge. And so I hope if you're someone who struggles with binge eating, perhaps you're able to relate to one or a few of these mistakes that I made. And I hope that by sharing this, it helped you see that there is a way out. That binge eating and overeating and emotional eating does not happen in a vacuum. You weren't born with this behavior. It was learned. It was caused by something. And when you actually patch that hole up in the boat, right? Address the root cause of the symptom, then you can feel safe in your boat, right? Then you can keep floating. Then you can move on and start working on creating a healthy, balanced, and consistent way of eating, one that allows you to keep foods in the house without losing control, without being afraid. Now I've got so many foods in my house that I never would have been able to keep before. I have fishies and chips and chocolate that have been there for months. I have to throw food out now because I forget that it's there. That's the beauty of learning how to be an intuitive eater, of healing your relationship with food. It's not that you start eating whatever you want, whenever you want, without any regards to health. No, it's that you start being able to trust yourself around food. It's no longer about control. It's about trust, and things become easy and natural for you. So if you are someone who struggles with binge eating, then I definitely recommend that you join my free 7-day intuitive eating challenge. It starts next week on April 20th. You are going to get access to free trainings, free Zoom trainings from me live. You can ask your questions. You can even perhaps get some coaching from me. You will have access to workbooks and exclusive trainings that I only give out to my Food Freedom Academy clients. So you'll be able to have access to those as well. You'll also have a community of women who are going through the challenge with you. It is so much fun. I am so excited to bring it back. We got just so many amazing success stories from the last one. And so if you want to overcome binge eating once and for all, then I hope to see you on the inside. You can sign up at sabrinamagnan.com/challenge, and that link is going to be in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening. Again, if this was helpful, make sure to share it with a friend who might be struggling with the same thing, or you can send me a message on Instagram and tell me one of the biggest takeaways from this episode. So thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next week. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you found it valuable, I would love if you would share it with someone you know that could benefit. If you're loving the show, don't forget to subscribe over on Apple Podcasts so you don't miss a single episode. I really love hearing feedback from you, so please leave a rating and review over on Apple to help us get in the ears of more people who need it the most. Finally, come hang out with me on Instagram at Sabrina Magnan Health for more educational content and get up close and personal with me. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you on the next episode.